Joining us now from Washington, D.C., Graeme Bannerman, scholar at the Middle East Institute and a former top lobbyist for the Egyptian government. Graeme, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Do we know why President Morsi granted himself all of these powers and why now all of a sudden?
No, we don't. I mean, that's one of the problems is either it is a very foolish move that he's not taken into account the feelings of other people in Egypt and the understanding, or it is some more devious plot. That's the problem. People don't know what his motives were.
Following the truce between Israel and Gaza, President Morsi seen as a big reason why that even came to be in the first place. I asked that timing question again. Is this a curious time for this whole thing to happen?
I don't think so. I think you have to understand that the process of developing a constitution of Egypt has taken a lot more time than anybody would want. And President Morsi obviously wants to speed up the process and get through the constraints. And he was so distracted by the situation in Gaza over the last week, 10 days, that now when it's somewhat settled, he has time to focus again on domestic issues.
Many Egyptians are concerned that this is going to lead to another dictatorship. Did he go too far too soon?
Well, I think you have to understand that he restricted the judiciary and the impact of the judiciary on the president's role even more than President Mubarak had. So therefore, this is a great step forward. Whether he did this because he felt that the judiciary was a constraint on the development of the Constitution or some other reason, we don't know what his motives were. He says himself that he did it to protect democracy, though this, to most people, appears somewhat an odd way to do that.
So can you say with any amount of certainty this morning that this was a move to protect democracy, that it's a move in establishing a new democratic government? Is this just a growing pain, or are we looking at something more here? Is this a repeat of history?
We don't know what that is, and that's the most important thing. We really don't know. The fear is that it's an assertion of power by the Islamic forces to take over Egypt. And President Morsi has made several moves in the last month that have demonstrated a lack of at least understanding or a tin ear towards the minorities in Egypt. For example, he did not attend the installation of the Pope of the Coptic Church. That was a very odd move from my point of view when he said, "I'm president of all Egyptians." This was a very important moment for the Christian community. And on last Friday, the Shias in Egypt wanted to celebrate Ashura, their biggest holiday, at the Hassan Mosque, and they were prevented from doing so. So there's certainly been a lack of understanding for these groups in Egypt that he's displayed.
Egypt hasn't had a constitution in place since former President Hosni Mubarak's overthrow. Do we have any idea the reason why? What's taking so long?
Well, the problem was first they wanted to choose a constitutional assembly to write the Constitution after the Parliament was elected. The elections were delayed until last January, and finally they had the Assembly, and then not until the spring was these people chosen to write the Constitution. They thought it would only take 6 weeks or 2 months, but all of a sudden they've seen there's real differences in Egypt to of what should be in that Constitution, and so that is a problem for them. It is taking a lot more time.
So what is the
hang-up? And there are fundamental differences.
In that fundamental difference, let's talk about that. Does it rest primarily with religion and the role that religion should play in government?
That is certainly one of the major issues. Is should this be, as in the past, that the laws of the land would be based on Sharia, or should it be Sharia is the law of the land? And there are those forces who are very influential on the president who want it to be the law of the land rather than just the inspiration or the basis of the law of the land.
You used to be the lobbyist for Egypt in Washington. What does Morsi need to do right now to ease the concerns not only of the Egyptian people, but of officials here in the United States after granting himself all of those sweeping powers?
Well, I'd like to say what I believe. I believe very strongly that the United States has benefited significantly since we improved the relationship in the 1970s and with Egypt. Egypt is a fundamental player in the Middle East, and good relations with Egypt and the United States remain in the basic interest of both countries. Now, the problem is that President Mubarak, at the end of his regime, was doing things that the United States wanted him to do that were not popular with the Egyptian people. President Morsi is not going to do that, and he can't be president of the Egyptian people in a democratic society and do that. So therefore, it is going to be a much more difficult relationship between the United States and Egypt. But that does not lessen the importance of that relationship for both Egypt and the United States.
Meanwhile, the protests in Egypt continue this morning. Graeme Bannerman, scholar at the Middle East Institute and a former top lobbyist for the Egyptian government, joining us this morning. Graeme, thank you so much.
My pleasure.